My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and I need to tell you something that's been eating me alive for 3 years now. They told me it was love when Marcus first started calling me 17 times a day. They told me it was devotion when he showed up at my workplace unannounced, flowers in hand, disrupting my meetings with that charming smile that made my colleagues swoon. They told me it was romantic when he insisted on picking out my clothes each morning, claiming he just wanted me to look beautiful for the world. But love isn't supposed to make you feel like you're suffocating, is it? It started so differently. I remember the first time I saw him at that coffee shop downtown, the way he looked up from his laptop when I accidentally knocked over the sugar dispenser. His laugh was warm, infectious, the kind that makes you want to laugh along even when you're mortified. He helped me clean up the mess, his fingers brushing mine as we reached for the same napkin, and I felt that electric spark everyone talks about in movies. Those first few weeks were intoxicating. He texted me good morning before my alarm went off and good night after I'd already fallen asleep. He remembered every detail I shared about my day, my dreams, my fears. When I mentioned loving sunflowers in passing, he showed up the next day with a bouquet so large I could barely see him behind it. When I said I missed my grandmother's apple pie, he spent an entire weekend learning her recipe from my mother. I thought I had found my soulmate. The shift was so gradual I didn't notice it happening. The sweet texts became constant check-ins. Where are you? Who are you with? Why haven't you responded? The surprise visits became surveillance. The thoughtful gestures became control disguised as care. When I tried to voice my discomfort, he would look at me with those deep brown eyes filled with hurt and confusion. Don't you want someone who loves you this much? The question haunted me because I couldn't answer it honestly without feeling ungrateful. Here was a man who claimed to worship the ground I walked on, who said he couldn't breathe without me, who promised to give me the world. My friends envied me. My sister constantly reminded me how lucky I was to have found someone so devoted. My mother would sigh wistfully whenever Marcus brought her favorite chocolates, wishing aloud that my father had been half as attentive. So I convinced myself that my discomfort was the problem, not his behavior. I started making excuses for the tightness in my chest when my phone rang. I rationalized the way he would count the minutes I spent talking to other people, timing my conversations like a stopwatch was running in his head. When he began suggesting I didn't need to see my friends so often, I told myself he just wanted to spend more time together. When he offered to handle my finances because managing money stressed me out, I gratefully handed over control, relief washing over me that someone else would deal with the burden. The first time he raised his voice at me, I was so shocked I couldn't speak. We were at his apartment, and I had made the mistake of mentioning that my coworker Jake had complimented my presentation. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. His face darkened, his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, and suddenly I was pressed against the wall while he demanded to know what I had done to earn such attention from another man. I hadn't done anything. I had simply existed, excelled at my job, received recognition for my work. But in that moment, against that wall with his breath hot on my face, I felt guilty for things I hadn't even done. Afterward, he cried. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe, sobbing apologies into my hair, promising it would never happen again. He loved me too much, he said. Sometimes love made people crazy. I comforted him, stroking his back while my own hands shook, convincing us both that this was just passionate love taken too far. The apologies became a routine I knew by heart. First came the incident, always triggered by something I had supposedly done to betray his trust or make him question my love. Then came his explosive reaction, followed by hours of him explaining why my actions had forced his hand. Finally, the tearful reconciliation where he would beg my forgiveness while making it clear that I was the one who needed to change. I started walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every glance, every breath. When we went out together, I kept my eyes fixed on him, afraid that looking at anyone else would trigger another episode. I stopped wearing the dress he said was too revealing, threw away the lipstick he claimed was too seductive, deleted social media accounts he insisted were invitations for other men to pursue me. Each concession felt reasonable in isolation. One dress, one lipstick, one Instagram account. Small prices to pay for peace, for his happiness, for what I still believed was love. But piece by piece, I was disappearing, and I was too exhausted to notice. Work became my only refuge, the one place he couldn't follow me every second of the day. But even there, his presence loomed. He would call during important meetings, timing his emergencies perfectly to disrupt my focus. When I stopped answering during work hours, he began showing up, always with some romantic gesture that made my colleagues think I was the luckiest woman alive while making me feel trapped in a cage made of roses and chocolate. My performance began to suffer. Projects I could have completed in my sleep suddenly felt impossible. My boss, Rebecca, started asking if everything was okay at home. I assured her it was perfect, that I was just tired, that love was wonderfully exhausting. She looked at me with concerned eyes that saw more than I was ready to admit, even to myself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had worked late on a presentation, losing track of time in the way that used to make me feel alive and accomplished. When I finally checked my phone, I found 43 missed calls and a stream of texts that escalated from worry to anger to threats. I found him sitting in my apartment when I got home, having used the key I had given him during happier times. He was calm, unnaturally so, sitting in my favorite chair like he owned it, owned me, owned every breath I took. He didn't yell this time. Instead, he spoke in measured tones about respect and priorities and how a woman who truly loved her man would never cause him such worry. He had quit his job that afternoon, he told me. He couldn't concentrate knowing I was out there, unmonitored, potentially betraying him with every passing moment. From now on, he would dedicate himself entirely to our relationship. He would make sure nothing ever came between us again. The words hit me like physical blows. I realized that what I had mistaken for love was actually a carefully constructed prison, and I was both the prisoner and the architect of my own captivity. Every boundary I had allowed him to cross, every excuse I had made, every time I had chosen his comfort over my own well-being had led to this moment. I told him I needed space to think. The reaction was immediate and violent. He grabbed my wrists, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks that would take weeks to fade. He screamed about how much he had sacrificed for me, how ungrateful I was, how no one would ever love me the way he did. In his twisted logic, his obsession was a gift I was too selfish to appreciate. For the first time in months, clarity cut through my confusion like a blade. This wasn't love. Love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't isolate you from everyone who cares about you. Love doesn't make you afraid to breathe too loudly or laugh too long or exist too fully. I looked at him and saw not the charming man from the coffee shop, but a stranger who had systematically dismantled my life while convincing me he was saving it. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. I was in an abusive relationship, and I needed to get out. But knowing something and acting on it are two entirely different things, especially when you've been conditioned to doubt your own perceptions for months. That night, after he finally left, I sat in my bathtub fully clothed, letting the water soak through my jeans while I tried to process what my life had become. The woman who had once given presentations to boardrooms full of executives was afraid to check her email without permission. The person who had traveled solo through Europe at 22 was terrified to walk to the grocery store alone. I called my sister Emma at 2 in the morning, my voice barely a whisper as I tried to explain what I couldn't fully understand myself. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, there was a long silence before she spoke. "I've been waiting for this call for months," she said simply. The relief of being believed, of not having to convince someone that my reality was real, brought tears I had been holding back for too long. Emma had seen the changes in me, the way I had shrunk into myself, how I checked my phone constantly with a look of fear rather than anticipation. She had watched Marcus isolate me and known exactly what was happening, but she also knew that I had to come to the realization myself. We talked until sunrise, creating a plan that felt both impossible and necessary. I would leave, but it would have to be strategic. Men like Marcus didn't let go easily, and the most dangerous time for women in abusive relationships is when they try to escape. The statistics she quoted made my blood run cold, but they also strengthened my resolve. Over the following weeks, I began the delicate process of reclaiming my life. I opened a new bank account that he couldn't access, routing my paycheck to an address he didn't know. I started staying late at work not to avoid going home, but to research apartments, domestic violence resources, and legal protections. I reconnected with friends I had abandoned, carefully rebuilding bridges I thought were permanently burned. Marcus sensed something changing. His surveillance intensified, his accusations became more frequent and more outlandish. He accused me of having affairs with my mailman, my dentist, the barista who made my morning coffee. The paranoia that had once seemed like devotion revealed itself as something much darker and more dangerous. The hardest part was maintaining the facade that everything was normal while planning my escape. I had to continue being the compliant girlfriend he expected while secretly gathering the resources I needed to survive without him. Every smile felt like betrayal of myself, every kiss like a lie I was telling to save my own life. I found a studio apartment across town, small and bare but mine in a way nowhere had been for months. The landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, asked no questions when I paid 6 months' rent in advance with cash, but she looked at me with knowing eyes that suggested she had helped other women in similar situations. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, whom I had started seeing under the guise of work stress, helped me understand the psychological tactics Marcus had used to control me. Gaslighting, isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation. Each term felt like a key unlocking another door in my mind, explaining experiences I had thought were my fault or my failure to love properly. Love bombing, she called those early weeks of excessive attention and affection. It wasn't genuine devotion but a calculated strategy to make me dependent on his validation before the abuse began. The man I had fallen in love with had never really existed. He was a character Marcus had played long enough to hook me, then gradually revealed his true nature once he believed I was too invested to leave. Learning this should have made leaving easier, but it actually made it harder in some ways. It meant that the beautiful beginning of our relationship, the memories I treasured, were all built on lies. The person I grieved losing had been an illusion from the start. 3 months after that night in the bathtub, I was ready to go. Emma had arranged to help me move during the day when Marcus thought I was at work. We would have a few hours at most before he realized what was happening, and then I would disappear into a life he couldn't reach. The morning I left, Marcus kissed me goodbye like he had every morning for over a year. "I love you," he whispered against my lips, and for just a moment I felt the old pull, the desire to believe him despite everything. But I had learned the difference between love and possession, between devotion and control. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love doesn't punish you for having thoughts and feelings and dreams that exist independent of another person. Real love celebrates your wholeness instead of demanding your brokenness. Emma arrived at 10 with her boyfriend's truck and 2 friends I barely remembered from before Marcus. They worked efficiently and quietly, packing my life into boxes while I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe I was actually doing this. Every sound from the hallway made my heart race, certain that Marcus had somehow discovered my plan and was coming to stop me. We were loading the last box when my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen, and my hand started shaking so violently I couldn't hold the device. Emma took it from me and declined the call, then immediately powered it off. "Later," she said. "When you're safe." The drive to my new apartment felt like traveling to another planet. Everything looked different through the lens of freedom, colors more vivid, possibilities more real. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without feeling like I was stealing air that belonged to someone else. But freedom, I learned, comes with its own challenges. That first night alone in my studio, I sat on my air mattress surrounded by boxes and felt completely lost. Marcus had made every decision for me for so long that I had forgotten how to choose what to eat for dinner or which movie to watch. The silence that should have felt peaceful instead felt overwhelming. My phone, when I finally turned it on, contained 78 missed calls and a novel's worth of text messages that ran the entire emotional spectrum from loving to enraged to desperate. He had been to my old apartment, had called my job, had contacted my family. He was looking for me, and he wasn't going to stop. The messages painted a clear picture of his mental state as he realized what had happened. The first few were confused, asking where I was, if I was okay. Then came anger, accusations that I was a liar and a whore who had used him. Finally, desperation, promises to change, threats of self-harm if I didn't come back. Dr. Martinez had warned me about this cycle, how abusers often threaten suicide when they lose control of their victims. It's manipulation, she had explained, a final attempt to make you responsible for their well-being when they can no longer control your behavior directly. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are vastly different things. I called the police for a wellness check, giving them his address and explaining the situation without revealing my location. They would make sure he wasn't actually in danger while protecting me from having to respond to his manipulation myself. It felt like the most adult thing I had done in months. The restraining order was easier to get than I had expected, his own messages providing ample evidence of harassment and threats. The court clerk, a woman about my age with kind eyes, stamped the papers with an efficiency that suggested she had processed hundreds of similar requests. She handed me a copy and told me to keep it with me always, her tone suggesting she knew how often these legal protections failed to provide actual safety. Work became complicated when Marcus began showing up there, demanding to know where I was, causing scenes in the lobby that embarrassed me even though I wasn't present for them. Rebecca called me into her office and, without asking for details, offered to let me work remotely for as long as I needed. The kindness of near strangers often amazed me during this period, while the people I had expected to understand seemed completely baffled by my choices. My mother called me crying, unable to understand how I could leave such a devoted man. "He loves you so much," she sobbed, as if love was a finite resource I was wasting by refusing to accept his version of it. She had been charmed by his constant attention to her, the way he remembered her birthday and brought her flowers, and she couldn't reconcile that behavior with my claims of abuse. This was perhaps the most isolating part of the entire experience. The people who should have been my strongest support system were instead questioning my judgment, suggesting I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me. They had seen his public face, his carefully crafted persona, and they couldn't believe it was a mask. Only Emma truly understood, having watched the transformation from the outside. She moved in with me temporarily, sleeping on my couch and screening my calls, serving as a buffer between me and a world that suddenly felt dangerous in ways I was still learning to navigate. Having her there meant I could sleep without jumping at every sound, could leave my apartment without looking over my shoulder every few steps. The physical symptoms of trauma surprised me. My body, which had been in a constant state of hypervigilance for months, didn't know how to relax even after the immediate threat was gone. I developed insomnia, anxiety attacks, and a startle response so severe that sudden noises would leave me shaking for hours. Dr. Martinez explained that my nervous system had been hijacked by chronic stress, and it would take time to teach it that I was safe. Marcus's attempts to contact me continued for weeks. He created new phone numbers when I blocked the old ones, made fake social media accounts to send me messages, even had friends and family members call on his behalf. Each contact felt like a violation, a reminder that my safety was still fragile and dependent on his choosing to respect boundaries he had never acknowledged before. The worst was when he found out where I worked and sent flowers to my office with a card that read, "I know you still love me. Come home." My colleagues, who didn't know the full story, thought it was romantic. "Look how much he misses you," one said. "You must have really broken his heart." Their reactions made me question my own memories, wonder if I was being too harsh, if I should give him another chance. "This is exactly what he's counting on," Dr. Martinez reminded me. Abusers are experts at making their victims doubt their own experiences. The fact that you're questioning yourself doesn't mean you're wrong. It means his conditioning was effective. 6 months after I left, the contacts finally stopped. I learned through mutual friends that Marcus had moved to another city, supposedly for a job opportunity but more likely because his reputation in our shared social circle had become too damaged to repair. The relief was overwhelming, but it also came with unexpected grief. I mourned not just the relationship, but the version of myself I had lost in it. Recovery, I discovered, is not a linear process. Some days I felt strong and independent, proud of my courage in leaving and building a new life. Other days I felt hollow and lost, questioning every decision and wondering if I would ever feel whole again. The woman I had been before Marcus seemed like a stranger, and I wasn't sure how to find my way back to her or if I even wanted to. Therapy helped, but progress was slow and often frustrating. We had to untangle years of conditioning, identifying which thoughts were mine and which had been planted by someone who claimed to love me while systematically destroying my sense of self. I had to relearn basic things like trusting my own judgment, expressing opinions without immediate panic, and believing that my needs and wants were valid. The first time I bought groceries without mentally calculating whether my choices would upset someone else, I stood in the cereal aisle and cried. Such a simple thing, choosing between cornflakes and granola, but it represented a freedom I had forgotten existed. The elderly man shopping next to me asked if I was okay, and I couldn't explain that I was crying from joy, not sadness. Dating seemed impossible. How could I trust someone new when I had been so wrong about Marcus? How could I believe compliments when I now knew they could be weapons? How could I allow someone to get close when closeness had become synonymous with danger? Dr. Martinez suggested I wasn't ready yet, and I knew she was right, but the loneliness was sometimes overwhelming. My career slowly recovered as I learned to focus again without the constant distraction of managing someone else's emotions. Rebecca promoted me, acknowledging that my work had suffered during what she diplomatically called my difficult period, but recognizing that I was returning to my former capabilities. The promotion came with increased responsibilities and travel opportunities one hadn't realized I missed until they were offered again. Emma eventually moved back to her own place, confident that I could handle being alone without falling apart. The night she left, I sat in my studio apartment and marveled at the silence. It wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. I could hear my own thoughts without having to monitor them for potential offense or betrayal. 2 years after leaving Marcus, I met David at a conference in Seattle. He was presenting on sustainable business practices, and I found myself genuinely interested in both the subject and the man discussing it. When he asked if I wanted to get coffee after his presentation, my first instinct was panic, but I pushed through it and said yes. Coffee led to dinner, dinner led to long walks, and long walks led to conversations that stretched until dawn. David was patient with my boundaries, never pushing when I needed space, never demanding explanations for my occasional inexplicable fears. When I finally told him about Marcus, he listened without trying to fix me or minimize my experience. He had his own story of emotional abuse from a previous relationship, and he understood the way trauma could resurface at unexpected moments, turning ordinary interactions into minefields of memory and fear. We learned to navigate recovery together, supporting each other through flashbacks and setbacks without trying to be each other's sole source of healing. The difference between David's love and Marcus's obsession was immediately apparent but took me longer to trust. David encouraged my friendships, celebrated my professional successes, and maintained his own life and interests outside our relationship. When I traveled for work, he missed me but didn't count the hours I was gone or demand constant updates on my activities. He loved me as I was, not as a project to be molded into his ideal woman. It took me months to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, for his kindness to reveal itself as another form of control. But David's consistency gradually taught me that love could be safe, that devotion didn't require possession, that someone could care deeply about me without needing to own every aspect of my existence. 3 years into our relationship, David proposed during a hiking trip in the mountains. I said yes immediately, then spent the rest of the day crying as I realized I had never thought I would trust someone enough to marry them again. The engagement ring felt foreign on my finger, not because I didn't want to wear it, but because it represented a future I hadn't dared to imagine. Planning our wedding became an exercise in reclaiming joy from rituals that had been tainted by my past. I had to remind myself that this celebration was about David and me, not about Marcus and the life I had escaped. Every decision, from the venue to the guest list to the vows we would speak, was an opportunity to choose love over fear. My mother, who had eventually come to understand why I left Marcus, helped me find a dress that made me feel beautiful without feeling exposed. Emma stood as my maid of honor, the woman who had answered my desperate phone call and helped me pack my life into boxes, now witnessing me unpack it into something bigger and brighter than I had imagined possible. Marcus tried to contact me one final time the week before the wedding. A mutual friend mentioned seeing the engagement announcement online, and somehow he found my new email address to send a message that alternated between congratulations and criticism. He hoped I would be happy, he wrote, but wondered if my new fiancé knew what he was getting into with someone as damaged as I had become. I read the message once, showed it to David, and then deleted it without responding. His words had no power over me anymore. I knew who I was now, not damaged, but healed, not broken, but rebuilt stronger than before. The scars from my relationship with him were real, but they were proof of what I had survived, not evidence of what I lacked. Our wedding day was perfect not because everything went according to plan, but because it was ours. When David and I exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other while maintaining our individual identities, I understood finally what healthy love looked like. It was expansive rather than restrictive, generous rather than possessive, peaceful rather than chaotic. The reception was filled with people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life and who were now celebrating this new chapter. Dr. Martinez attended, having become more than just a therapist but a guide who had helped me find my way back to myself. Rebecca gave a toast about resilience and second chances that made everyone cry, including me. Married life with David continued to teach me lessons about love I had never learned before. We disagreed about things without it becoming a catastrophe. We spent time apart without suspicion or resentment. We supported each other's dreams even when they didn't directly benefit our relationship. The ordinariness of our happiness was perhaps its most extraordinary quality. I returned to solo travel, something I had abandoned entirely during my relationship with Marcus. David encouraged these trips, understanding that my independence wasn't a threat to our marriage but a necessary component of my well-being. When I sent him photos from Paris or Tokyo or wherever my work took me, he responded with enthusiasm rather than interrogation. The first time I traveled alone after remarrying, I called him from my hotel room in London, overwhelmed by the simple pleasure of choosing how to spend my evening without consulting anyone else. I could eat dinner at 10 p.m. or not at all, could wander through museums until they closed, could talk to strangers without fear of later accusations or punishment. "You sound happy," David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice across the ocean. 5 years into our marriage, I became pregnant. The news brought joy mixed with unexpected terror as memories of Marcus's talk about starting a family flooded back. He had wanted children not as people to love but as additional ways to bind me to him forever. The idea of bringing a child into that suffocating environment now seemed impossibly cruel. But this pregnancy was happening in a completely different context. David and I discussed parenting with the same open communication we brought to every aspect of our relationship. We talked about balancing careers with child rearing, about maintaining our individual identities while becoming parents, about creating a home environment based on respect rather than control. Dr. Martinez, whom I still saw occasionally for maintenance sessions, helped me process the fear that I might somehow recreate the patterns I had experienced. The fact that I was worried about this, she assured me, was actually evidence that I wouldn't. Abusers rarely question their own behavior, survivors often question everything. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 7 years after the night I had sat in my bathtub and realized I needed to leave Marcus. Holding my daughter for the first time, I understood love in a way I never had before. This tiny person was completely dependent on me, and my first instinct wasn't to control or possess her but to protect and nurture her growth into her own independent being. The maternal love I felt was fierce but not suffocating, devoted but not destructive. I named her Hope, partly because she represented the future I had rebuilt from the ashes of my past, and partly because I wanted her to always remember that even in the darkest moments, something beautiful might be waiting just beyond the horizon. Raising Hope with David showed me daily examples of what healthy relationships looked like. She watched her parents disagree respectfully, support each other's dreams, maintain friendships outside their marriage, and treat each other with consistent kindness. She was growing up in an environment where love was safe, where individual identity was celebrated, where boundaries were respected. Sometimes, usually when I was tired or stressed, I would catch myself monitoring David's behavior for signs of the controlling tendencies I had learned to fear. But he remained consistently himself, kind, supportive, independent, and secure enough in our love not to need to possess it completely. Hope's first word was "Dada," which made David cry with joy and made me realize how much healing I had done. I felt no jealousy or competition, only happiness that my daughter felt safe enough to express preference without fear of disappointing the other parent. In my relationship with Marcus, every choice had felt like a betrayal of someone. When Hope was 2, Marcus's mother contacted me through social media. Her son was getting married, she wrote, and she thought I should know. He had found happiness at last, she said, implying that I had been the obstacle to his well-being all those years ago. The message stung briefly before I recognized it as the final echo of a story I had already finished writing. I wished him well, sincerely hoping he had learned to love someone without destroying them, but I felt no curiosity about his new life. That chapter of my story was closed, and I was deep into writing new ones filled with characters who knew the difference between love and obsession. On Hope's 3rd birthday, David surprised me with a photo album he had been secretly compiling. It chronicled our journey from that first coffee in Seattle through our wedding, travels, and now parenthood. Looking at the pictures, I could see the progression of my healing in my own face. The haunted look in my eyes from our early photos had gradually been replaced by genuine peace and joy. The woman in the recent photos looked like someone I barely remembered from before Marcus, but better, stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I had not just recovered my old self, I had become someone new, someone who understood both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience. I started speaking at domestic violence awareness events, sharing my story to help other women recognize the signs I had missed or ignored. The first time I stood at a podium and said the words he told me it was love, but it felt like punishment, I saw recognition flash across faces in the audience. After my talk, women approached me with their own stories of escape or their fears about leaving. Each conversation reminded me why I had survived, why I had found the courage to leave, why I had done the hard work of rebuilding my life. It wasn't just for me, it was for every woman who needed to see that escape was possible, that life after abuse could be beautiful, that love didn't have to hurt. Hope often accompanied me to these events, playing quietly in the back of the room while I spoke. She was too young to understand the content of my presentations, but she was absorbing lessons about strength, independence, and the importance of helping others. I wanted her to grow up knowing that her mother was someone who had faced darkness and chosen light. David supported these speaking engagements even when they meant time away from our family or difficult emotions stirred up by recounting my past. He understood that this work was part of my healing process and that my experiences could serve a purpose beyond my own recovery. 10 years after leaving Marcus, I could honestly say I was grateful for what I had endured, not because I had deserved it or because it had made me stronger, but because surviving it had led me to this life, this love, this family. Today, as I write these words, Hope is playing in the garden while David reads nearby, and I am struck by the profound ordinariness of our happiness. There are no dramatic gestures here, no grand declarations of obsessive love, no need to prove devotion through possession or control. There is just a family living peacefully together, each person valued for who they are rather than what they can provide to someone else's ego. Sometimes people ask me if I ever wonder what would have happened if I had stayed with Marcus, if I had tried harder to make that relationship work. The answer is simple. I know exactly what would have happened. I would have disappeared completely, erased by someone who claimed to love me while systematically destroying everything that made me who I was. The woman who stayed in that relationship would not have become the mother Hope deserves, the partner David chose, or the person who can now help other women find their way out of similar darkness. That woman would have been a ghost, alive but not living, present but not whole. I learned that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your identity on its altar. Real love celebrates your completeness rather than demanding your emptiness. Real love wants you to grow and succeed and shine, even when that means shining independently. Real love is patient and kind and respectful of boundaries, not because it has to be but because it wants to be. My story is not unique, but it is mine, and telling it has been part of claiming back the voice I lost for so long. To every woman reading this who recognizes herself in my experience, I want you to know that the life you are living is not the only life available to you. You can leave. You can heal. You can love again, safely this time. They told me it was love, but it felt like punishment. Now I know the difference, and I will spend the rest of my life helping others learn it too. Because real love doesn't hurt. Real love doesn't control. Real love sets you free to be exactly who you were always meant to be. And that woman, the one you were always meant to be, is worth saving.